What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and now that we have finished with a story involving the Dark Crisis and Justice League Incarnate, we are here at the death of the Justice League. So Justice Incarnate, for those of you guys who are catching up with us, are basically the multiversal Justice League team. They're not the traditional superheroes that you're used to seeing. They're basically versions of like Superman and so on from alternate realities. That what ended up happening is they were unable to stop the coming of the Great Darkness, which for those of you guys who don't know what that is, we'll actually do a bit of a refresher as we get further through this video because it's explained pretty well in this story. But the other thing about this is that Darkseid, who's kind of the representation of evil in its most true form in DC Comics, not taking into account Lucifer Morningstar, that he was taken by the Great Darkness. So basically what you have is this just insanely powerful army. And again, they'll reappear in this story. So those of you guys who were playing catch up, don't worry, you won't feel left out by the time this gets done. Now the thing about this is that this initially opens up basically at Earth Zero. Remember, Earth Zero is the main DC universe in DC Comics, where you see Batman, Superman, and all those guys. And what ends up happening is Black Adam, along with other members of what are basically the Justice League, Aquaman, Martian Manhunter, Wonder Woman, Superman, Batman, the Green Lantern, Zatanna, who's basically just a really powerful magician, and Hawkgirl, they're all essentially whisked away by Justice Incarnate and brought to the Justice League headquarters, or at least to the Justice Incarnate headquarters, what's really kind of left of it. Now, of course, we do get a bit of a recap, which is basically everything that I just said a minute ago, so we can kind of skim past that. But the reality is that with Superman and these guys showing up, they're kind of flabbergasted that they were never contacted by Justice Incarnate in the first place. And for the most part, that makes sense. The Justice League, as it exists in the main DC universe, it is an incredibly powerful team. But the reality here is Justice Incarnate is more powerful than they are because they have a variety of superheroes, a much larger roster than the Justice League traditionally has, because you have like multiple versions of Superman as part of Justice Incarnate. Really good example being like President Superman, and then Captain Carrot, who's basically a version of Superman from a different reality, just things along those lines. And so for the most part, when it comes to multiversal threats, that's the Justice Incarnate's thing. It's what they handle. This is a threat of such a level that Justice Incarnate can't handle it on their own, and they've also lost some of their number. Now, the reason why Superman and them are also sort of flabbergasted is because they've dealt with multiple crisis events. Remember, after everything that's happened in DC Comics in recent years, where Crisis on Infinite Earths and then Infinite Crisis and Final Crisis, where those were all events that basically kind of changed the continuity of DC Comics. Some people remembered it, some people didn't, but it kind of reset the universe in different ways. The truth is that with what's happened recently, everybody remembers all the crisis events now. They remember all those events that have happened over the course of DC's timeline. And so with all the superheroes recalling all of that, the response to Superman and them are like, we've dealt with multiple crisis events. If you got a toilet that's clogged, you don't call an electrician, you call a plumber. And we're the plumbers. Terrible analogy, I know, but you guys get the point. The problem is that in the middle of this whole discussion, suddenly you end up having the Great Darkness that makes its move against Justice Incarnate. And so what ends up happening is Dr. Multiverse ends up teleporting the entirety of the Justice League and what's left of Justice Incarnate to Multiverse 2. Now remember, this is one of the things that DC established, that for years and years and years in DC Comics, pretty much their entire history up until this moment, until the Dark Crisis story, there was only ever one multiverse. That the multiverse was destroyed during Crisis on Infinite Earths, the multiverse was brought back during Infinite Crisis, and then Final Crisis made the superheroes aware of its existence. It was changed during the events of Flashpoint, but it was still only one multiverse. What DC has done here with Dark Crisis is they've established the idea that the original multiverse that was destroyed during Crisis on Infinite Earths, it continued on. It was just being fed on as a source of energy by the Great Darkness and his ilk. And so we didn't know that it still existed. We thought it had been wiped out because Infinite Crisis brought the multiverse back, but it was a different version of the multiverse. So kind of multiverse 2 is what we can really call it. That's kind of the crazy thing here, because even when the superheroes arrive, they're like, okay, we thought this multiverse was dead. Like, how is this thing even here? And that's when they're met by the arrival of Pariah. Now, Pariah, as he's being shown in this story, is kind of modified a little bit from what DC's previously done with him, right? Originally, it was him that wanted to see the beginnings of all creation. It was him that unleashed the Anti-Monitor in the first place, and it was him that caused the Anti-Monitor to go on its rampage and basically wipe out the first multiverse during the original Crisis on Infinite Earths story. Ever since then, Pariah has literally had to deal with what's basically a punishment for his actions, in the sense that every time there's a major calamity on a colossal scale, some universe-wide event or something like that, he's automatically teleported against his will to that that location and he's forced to watch it happen, right? That's the price he pays for basically letting the anti-monitor loose in the first place. And so as a result of that, somewhere along the line, and we don't exactly know how, but somewhere along the line, the Great Darkness got its hands on Pariah. But the other thing about this is that where he was wildly capable and he was a pretty strong guy, his powers have been amplified. And we'll actually find out just how powerful he is in this story. Because up to this point in Justice Incarnate and those stories, Dr. Multiverse literally saying like, I'm the only one of myself across the multiverse, right? There's a whole great big huge multiverse, only one Dr. Multiverse in it, that her stance has been, we cannot mess with Pariah. That guy's on a whole different level of power. We are not ready to face off against that guy yet, right? Like we will get destroyed by him if we do. And so with Pariah being there, initially you have Superman doing what Superman does, right? Hey man, I know it sucks. I mean, when your world was destroyed, your world was the first one that fell to the anti-monitor, and you've had to watch a whole bunch of just events where everything dies and all that kind of stuff. And I know it sucks, man, but like, hey, dude, chill. Right? Like, let us help you out. Everything's going to be cool. But of course, he basically rejects that. And in doing so, what he reveals is the Great Darkness basically told him somewhere along the line, the Justice League from Earth Zero is going to respond, right? Superheroes are nothing if not as predictable as the sunrise. And because of that, when that time comes, you need to form a dark army. Hence the reason why he had captured Darkseid. Darkseid had been turned to the side of the Great Darkness and so on, because when this dark army manifests, it's basically some of the most powerful beings in existence, right? You have Ares, the god of war. You've got Doomsday, Darkseid. You've got the Upside Down Man, who you don't really see a lot of in DC Comics, but this guy's power is nuts, right? This guy is just astronomically powerful. The point that I'm making here when it comes to this is that on a good day, any one of these guys is a challenge for the Justice League. Now they have to face all of them united as a singular group. And while the Justice League does have Justice Incarnate, or what's left of their roster there to help them out, at the end of the day, these guys are nuts, right? Just remember, Darkseid by himself was enough to take on Justice Incarnate. And under any normal circumstance, before you had true form Darkseid, any just kind of alternate reality version of Darkseid was enough to take on the Justice League. Now you have true form Darkseid under the control of the Great Darkness with his powers amplified alongside Doomsday and the Empty Hand and all of these guys, right? It's a crazy circumstance. And so what you end up getting here, and this is a really, really cool analysis of the situation, what you end up getting here is this revelation that yes, these guys are serving as agents of the Great Darkness, but the Great Darkness is not using them to the best of their abilities. And in fact, it's not even really the Great Darkness itself. It's really more Pariah who's controlling them, which really shows that Pariah doesn't fully understand what he's doing here. And in fact, Superman goes as far as to say, when it comes to Darkseid, he's not just some brawler, right? Darkseid doesn't just jump in and start punching people. That's not what Darkseid does. I mean, sure, he's incredibly capable and his punches would hurt like hell, but the reality is that under any normal circumstance, Darkseid would either be standing back watching the event unfold and waiting for the opportune moment to step in, or he would just be firing his Omega beams off at everybody and the beams would just chase them around until that person is dead. The other part of this is that while each of these guys are a challenge, they're not being used to their fullest capacity in terms of the power they possess. And this is why the Justice League is even able to go toe-to-toe with these guys in the first place, because they start to realize that what's going on is that with everything Pariah's doing, he's stretching his power too thin among too many people. The truth here is that he only should have brought in maybe 2 or 3 people, and that should have been it. Like the Upside Down Man, Empty Hand, and like Darkseid, right? Or something along those lines. Like it only should have been a couple instead of like 5 or 6, because it's just way more than he's able to manage, and his power, while it is exceedingly high, is not infinite. And so ultimately what ends up happening is basically Darkseid is overtaken along with the other members of the Dark Army of Pariah. But in the end, what ends up happening here is Pariah kind of hits the bit of a panic button and literally tells the Green Lantern, John Stewart, your light is at the pinnacle of its power, Green Lantern, but the dark has no limit. My army is larger than you can even grasp thanks to Darkseid. And that's when it basically leads to the Quintessence. Now remember, the Quintessence are basically a coming together of some of the most powerful beings in existence. The Spectre, Phantom Stranger, who we know virtually nothing about, but it's believed that his power is just shy of that of God, right? So the guy's just crazy powerful. But when the Quintessence arrives here, that's when John Stewart's like, oh my God, right? Because remember, the Quintessence were there to keep Darkseid imprisoned on Earth Omega. But when Darkseid killed them, what it did is allowed Pariah to take take them and then bring them into the Great Darkness. So now they're under his control, which means in the midst of this entire battle, the Spectre manifests. Now, the Spectre's power has waxed and waned over the years in Marvel Comics, but this guy is DC's equivalent of the Living Tribunal, who's under the possession of an exceedingly just high level of power. And when the Spectre launches his attack, then it takes out Green Lantern just like that, right? John Stewart's basically done and gone. And then literally, because the Spectre's here, and then Oliver Queen, the Green Arrow, realizes that the antimatter machine of Pariah is what's keeping them here in the first place, he ultimately makes the move and he destroys it. And in doing so, what it does is it dissipates the ability of Pariah to control the Dark Army, and that basically leads to the Dark Army just essentially going away. Now, of course, it's kind of a last-ditch action. Doomsday jumps in and kills Oliver Queen because, you know, Green Arrow always dies in stories like this, right? But Green Arrow is now out of the picture. That leaves the rest of the Justice League, who basically start to make their move and attempt to attack Pariah, and that's when Dr. Multiverse steps in and says, no, like, we can't attack this guy, right? We cannot do this. Understand, this guy's powered by the Great Darkness. The Great Darkness is neither good nor evil, but it is a primal force of existence. It existed before all of creation, and it'll exist after. You can't defeat it. You can't overcome it. The best you can do is try to put it back to sleep again, but this is a source of power that's so extreme. Not even the presence, the god of the DC landscape, just DC's version of the one above all, not even that guy could kill the Great Darkness. All it could do was form a truce. That's basically what this is. But the Justice League doesn't listen. And when that happens, they launch their attack against Pariah, and Pariah kills them all in one fell swoop, just like that. The only person who survives, the only person that lives past any of this is Black Adam. And that's because Black Adam, kind of off to the side, launches an attack against Pariah. Now, here's one thing I want you to keep in mind. Black Adam is a guy who can go toe-to-toe with Superman, right? This guy can fight Superman to a standstill, and that's just based on physical strength. Once you start adding in things like magic, then he gets the upper hand. This guy goes to punch Pariah and nothing happens. Like, Pariah doesn't even feel it. It's like you hitting a brick wall. It just, there's nothing there. And Pariah literally says, like, I am a guy who survived the deaths of infinite Earths. Do you really think a punch is gonna hurt me? And so where he goes to destroy Black Adam, this basically leads to Black Adam basically shouting Shazam and just having one of the lightning bolts split the two of them, right? It's not enough to destroy Pariah, but it is enough to separate the two of them. But with the entirety of the Justice League seemingly eradicated by Pariah, just destroyed with what looked like the greatest of ease, Black Adam ends up crash landing on Earth. And when he does, when he arrives in the Hall of Justice, Wally West and those guys who are here on Earth, the kind of reserved members of the Justice League at the moment, they end up responding, and the only thing that Black Adam can say, the only energy he can muster up enough to say is, the Justice League are all dead. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.